What's going on, Tamers? It's me, guy who finally installed some curtains in front of his recording setup so now he doesn't get blinded by the sun whenever he tries to record in the daytime. I assume that's what getting Sunrise Buster feels like. Also, rest in peace, Sunrise Buster. So the fourth week of events for the BT11 Dimensional Phase meta have wrapped up over here in Japan, and after looking at the results, if there was one word I could use to describe them, it would be ingenious. There's a ton of interesting results we haven't seen in the previous weeks before. Side note, if this is my first meta recap video that you've seen and you want to know more about the BT11 meta or some of the previous metas for the Digimon TCG, I wholeheartedly recommend you check out some of my previous videos on the same topic. Anyway, let's take a look at some of the tournament results, the key takeaways, and some of the interesting decks that have topped over the course of the past week. So actually hopping into the results, we see that BlackWarGreymonX Antibody has taken the #1 spot for events for the fourth week in a row. I think it is safe to say at this point that it is the strongest deck in the meta by far. Despite that, the deck is still split between the red base and the black base. I think at this point the red base is the more popular variant, accounting for about 2/3 of the overall winning decks for the past week. Meanwhile, the black base is still being experimented with, and we're starting to see some really interesting techs and them actually paying off in tournament results as well. Especially with things like the inclusion of the starter deck, the Ragnarok starter deck, Ludamon. We'll take a closer look at that when we inspect some of the decks that have topped over the course of the week, so stay tuned. The one thing that both decks can agree on, however, is the new inclusion of Giomon in them, where in the past he was cut for just using the BlackWarGreymon and the BlackWarGreymonX Antibody. He's been re-added to the deck because he speeds up the games, being able to get Security Attack +1, and additionally hindering your opponent with the Digivolve effect that he has, which makes the deck all the more potent. So outside the dominance of BlackWarGreymonX Antibody, the meta does open up in a huge way. We saw a total of 22 other decks top over the course of the past week. Everything from Grandis, which acts as a fantastic counter to BlackWarGreymonX Antibody. If you want to know more about that, take a look at one of our previous videos. I think it was week 2 or week 3. And then Grandis also has its own faults. We see decks like X5 from Crossheart as well as X7 start to do really well. Things like a Mega Zoo version of Justimon, which has popped up. We saw Marsmon, Phoenixmon with the red-yellow tinge start to do really well. And then even things like DarkKnightmon with a Diabolomon package, which when we take a look at it in the deck profiles that have topped over the week, you guys are going to have your minds blown. Additionally, this diversity includes decks across time. So if you're the kind of player who wants to pick one deck and stick with it for a while, then you probably have a chance here in the BT11 meta. You know, we're starting to see older decks do really well that are just getting buffed up with some of the new cards. Yellow Hybrid Security Control has made an appearance alongside things like D-Reaper and even just a full-on Ragnarok deck. So if you're just trying to extend the lifespan of one of your older decks in this meta, it's definitely possible and viable in BT11. So looking at some of the decks that have topped over the course of the past week, the first one is one that I alluded to before, and that is the BlackWarGreymonX Antibody Black Base. However, it includes the Ludamon, which is a fantastic tech here. So the idea is to use the Ludamon's on playability to take one of the other cards in the deck that you didn't have a chance to Digivolve into when you're going to your BlackWarGreymon or BlackWarGreymonX Antibody and then slotting it in up under it, and then also getting some card draw off of that. Let's imagine that you went from your AgumonX Antibody straight into your GreymonX Antibody and then up into your BlackWarGreymonX Antibody later, but you didn't have a chance to get the Greymon itself in there. What you can do is you can later play the Ludamon and then just slot the Greymon up underneath it and then give him blocker. And then finally we see the inclusion of the Dorumon. The Dorumon I'm not a big fan of, but considering some of the lower cost cards a little heavier, being able to play a 4 cost or lower Digimon is kind of nice on security. This next deck I want to show off is a different variant of the BlackWarGreymonX Antibody package, and this one also runs the top half split between BlackWarGreymonX and WarGreymonX. So this takes advantage of the immense draw engine that X Antibody has, and it gives you the possibility of going into BlackWarGreymonX for most decks. And then if you're running the mirror or you're playing against another BlackWarGreymonX Antibody deck, you have the option of going into the WarGreymonX to speed up and outpace them and just win the game. You can see the deck is almost virtually split at every level between the black and the red package here, seeing the black and the red Agumons and X Antibodies as well as the Metal Greymons, and then the Metal GreymonX Antibody at the same time. And then finally, the top half, we've got the BlackWarGreymonX Antibody as well as the WarGreymonX Antibody, and even the inclusion of a BlackWarGreymon and another Giomon. Again, this card is fantastic, and if you want to make your deck as strong as it possibly can be for the BT11 meta, Giomon is a great inclusion. At first glance, I'm a little concerned about the consistency of the deck. However, knowing that X Antibody does have that great draw engine, I'm a little more at ease knowing I can likely get the cards that I'm going to need over the course of the game. The next deck that I want to show off is the new Mars Ho'omon with a little bit of a red-yellow tinge. We can see that they've added the Rise Greymon as well as the Rise GreymonX Antibody here in order to get those tamers down all the more quickly. With the inclusion of the red-yellow Sora and Tai tamer, it's really nice to just check the security without having to worry about what's going to be there. And then getting that additional memory gain off of the lack of security for you and your opponent is always good. This one does include a couple copies of Sunrise Buster. Look, I know you guys over there on the Ian side of the game aren't going to have access to this card within the next 2 weeks or so. Although I will say, just the single inclusion of a Sunrise Buster I think is still very valuable in this deck. If you're looking for something that's a little less Sunrise Buster reliant, then you might want to take a look at something a little bit more like this here, where you can see it has most of the Sunrise cards, for example, the Sora and Tide Tamer. It's also got the Rise Greymon. You can probably swap out a couple of the other top-end cards like the Garudamon for the X Antibody version of Rise Greymon, and then maybe one single copy of a Sunrise Buster might work as well. I actually played a couple of games against a friend of mine from Singapore named Ingai on stream a few weeks ago, and he was using this deck, or a deck similar to this one. If you're interested in seeing that deck in action, take a look at the VOD on my stream. I'll try to put some chapters on that VOD so that it's easier to navigate, because it is just one giant block of games, so I'll see if I can put some chapters in to help you guys find it a little bit faster. So the last deck that I want to highlight for the past week is going to be this DarkKnightmon / Diaboromon deck that, if I could only use one word to describe it, is ingenious. By swapping out the X Antibody package for like the DarkKnightmon X Antibody and then the Nene Tamer, you add in the Diaboromon package instead, and you gain so many good effects and speed off of the inheritance effect of the Chrysalimon right down here. Being able to take Digimon with the same name and give them Rush whenever they're played, and then you also gain effects from things like the Kiramon, which allows you to draw cards whenever Digimon with the same name are played. And because the DarkKnightmon package includes the DarkKnightmon Cavalier mode, who counts as 2 different types of named Digimon, this speeds the deck up so much. It also makes the top end of the deck faster with the inclusion of the Diaboromon as well as the Arata Tamer. Being able to play multiple Diaboromon who all have Rush and can attack immediately, other than just having the DarkKnightmon act as a blocker to slowly whittle down your opponent, is a fantastic idea. And then finally, 2 copies of the Death Xmon there, just to make sure that your opponent's board doesn't go too wild over the course of the game. Alright, so that's going to be the Japanese results for the BT11 Dimensional Phase Week 4 meta. Let me know your thoughts and comments below. Are you interested in trying out some of these wild decks like the DarkKnightmon / Diaboromon deck? What decks do you hope to see get beefed up in BT11 that you haven't seen so far? And also, do you think that one of these decks is actually the answer to BlackWarGreymonX Antibody? Anyway, folks, thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time. Before you get out of here, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.